Welcome to PTSD Self-Healing Show, a journey to self-discovery. I'm your host, Panta Kalhor. Episode 7, PTSD Recovery with Lise Leblanc, registered psychotherapist. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel and pre-order my book, Naturally Conceived, through Amazon. Thank you for watching. Hello, welcome to PTSD Self-Healing Show. I'm your host, Panta Kalhor, and today we are going to talk about childhood PTSD and abusive home, and people who actually recovered from it and how they react to it. And we have a very special guest called Lise Leblanc, and she actually suffered from abusive childhood, and she has a very interesting story to tell. She is a registered psychotherapist with 20 years experience working in therapeutic, educational, and leadership roles. Lise has seen firsthand the profound impacts that traumatic experiences can have on a person's life. Lise has bachelor degree in psychology and master's degree in educational leadership, as well as many clinical certifications. However, most of her knowledge does not come from books. It comes from overcoming her own traumatic experiences and personal challenges. Welcome to our show. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yes, I'm so happy to have you here. Welcome to our show. So tell me about yourself first.
How did you almost said it all, but I'm a registered psychotherapist. I'm an author, and I'm a certified coach and master coach practitioner. I have 20 years of experience working as a therapist. So I started my career in developmental services, working with children with autism, and then I worked in children's mental health, and then I spent 10 years as the director of a mental health and addictions clinic for adults. In the last 3 years, I have been in private practice, and I've been writing books, and my latest book is the PTSD guide. And so, in writing that book, I've shared some of my personal experiences, a lot of the stories that my clients have shared with me. And so even though I have a lot of formal training, my interest in trauma and PTSD really came from a lot of my own, getting through trauma during childhood, having a lot of difficulty in my adolescence because of the trauma that I experienced. So, I was in a lot of trouble, getting in trouble with the law, into drinking and drugs. I had an eating disorder. I was, diagnosed with anxiety and depression, was suicidal, and all these things were going on in my adolescence. And so, I had no idea when I went into the field of psychology that I was going into it to figure myself out. And so lucky for me, that did happen. But, in the early years of my career, I started, seeing clients, and I hadn't dealt with my own stuff. And, I was really working kind of from, book knowledge and things like that. But as I went through, I started doing my own internal work. And as I learned to, deal with my own unprocessed trauma, I learned how to help clients really get through theirs.
Lise, I think PTSD is a personal experience. I saw a lot of therapists who didn't have PTSD before, so they don't know exactly how to approach some patients. To be honest, somebody who already suffered from PTSD and solve her problems is more experienced to do this kind of thing. Because I had my own self-discovery treatments, And I didn't know those days that I have PTSD. I didn't see any therapist. And that's why it took me longer time to get rid of it.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody knew that I had it, even my parents, because I was living in another country, you know, so I had lots of thing dealing with my problem, and I had to solve it myself.
Mm-hmm.
But you are right. By the time you are not suffered from PTSD yourself, you cannot really treat your patients.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that there are, I think a lot of people go through some type of trauma and maybe aren't diagnosed with PTSD or don't have PTSD and can maybe still be a good therapist and really be able to walk their clients through that. In terms of being an effective therapist, I still think I had a lot of tools and things to offer clients. But once I really went through my own process of healing, and got to the other side of it, it gave me, a really deeper understanding of my clients. And, back then, people were diagnosed with anxiety and depression. So I would have clients coming in, their diagnosis was anxiety, depression, sometimes bipolar disorder. And as they were sharing their stories, I would hear a lot of stories of trauma. And that's when I really started questioning the whole concept of unprocessed trauma. And sometimes, a lot of times actually clients would come in and when I say unprocessed trauma, I was the first person that they'd shared their trauma with, or they may have shared it, one or two times, but it didn't work out. And then they start really spending a lot of their time and energy trying to avoid thinking about it, trying to block it out, finding all kinds of distractions, mind-numbing tactics to avoid that pain. And, and I knew all about that because I'd experienced that. And, I did turn my life around, but even once I did turn my life around, I had like kind of an awakening moment when I was 19 and started shifting the way I was living my life. But I was still micromanaging my nervous system. I was still stuck in survival mode. So even if I looked good on the outside, I was still always working very hard on the inside to manage that. And so I understood that part. And I understood that resisting, well, I eventually understood. I didn't understand that when I was, 20, 25 years old, but eventually understood that unprocessed trauma and that resisting and that kind of blocking and fighting, it just doesn't work.
I like that. You actually mentioned 2 points. First of all, you said about your awakening call. Exactly, I'm talking about myself, the same thing, awakening call. Because mine was a different story. I talk about it in many videos, so I don't want to waste your time. But I was just hit by trauma. Somebody robbed my car and threw me out of the car. And I had lots of nightmares after that. Mm-hmm. And that was awakening call for me because that changed my life forever. I immigrated 2 times to different countries and totally changed my life. As you said, trauma can be some push, can be only awakening call to tell you something, discover something from inside of you. So this is not just the pain that should go. You have to confront your pain. As you said, you shouldn't hide it, and you should actually confront with your fears and your pain. But I think we need some pause. You cannot just deal with it as soon as it happened to you. Mm-hmm. Like as myself, it took me some time to recover from it. You need some time to grieve and pause, rest, and then after sometimes, where I am. What should I do, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's what happened to you as well. I actually read your story. I love it. You said you had out-of-body experience at age of 19. Can you talk about this more?
Yeah, so I was 19 years old and my life was very upside down. I was in university and I was still managing in school, but I was in an abusive relationship and, smoking a lot of marijuana, just trying to numb the pain, drinking, that sort of thing. And I was, suicidal at times. And one night I just got to this point where I just felt like I was never going to have a normal life. And what was the point of all this? And I was just at such a point of suffering that, I didn't really know what to do. I just lost hope that things could get better. And so I was laying there on my bed and I just had this experience of, floating away from myself, if you will. So it was as though I had detached from myself and the me that, with all the problems and all these things that were happening in my life, I could see from a detached perspective. And so it was as though, there was an awareness of this, me and my story. And then it occurred to me that, well, maybe that's not me. Maybe this is me, the awareness of that. And so at the time, I didn't understand any of it, but it was very profound, even though, I don't even know how long it lasted. It may have just been a few moments, but, 2 days later, I think it was, I had a final exam to write and I just got on a bus. I left the relationship. I started making amends with the people I disconnected from because, my life was quite in a state of shambles. And so I started putting my life back together. And so I finished school. I was in Ottawa at the time. And so I went and I finished school in Sudbury, closer to home. And as I picked up the pieces, my way of kind of coping was just to block that stuff out. So it was as though I just kind of blocked out everything that happened in my first 20 years and made a plan to start fresh and really just kind of try to not deal with any of it. So I kind of built a wall between me and my trauma, because part of my trauma was trauma from early childhood, but then even in my adolescence with my own behavior, re-traumatized myself.
Exactly.
So there was a lot of that stuff that I had a lot of guilt. I had a lot of shame around things, choices I'd made, people I'd hurt, things I'd done. And so as I kind of closed that door, I was like, I just packed up this Pandora's box in the back of my mind. And I used up a lot of my energy to try and keep that box closed. And I kind of went on this search for happiness, just trying to do everything I was supposed to do. And, by the time I was 30, I was married, I had kids, I had a good job, I had a good education, I could go on trips, I had money to buy things, and I was still struggling on the inside. I was still dealing with that traumatized nervous system and really trying to constantly regulate myself. And so then I had a breakdown. When other stresses came into my life, it just became too much to, keep the lid down. And I kind of sometimes compare it to, holding a bunch of beach balls underwater. And, it's like you can only manage that for so long before they start popping up and hit you in the face, which is what happened to me.
So after you felt that you still have these triggers and these traumas inside you, what did you do when these triggers happened? Because you couldn't hide it anymore.
Yeah, so at 30 years old, a lot of things were going on in my life. I had just finished my master's degree, but my grandfather passed away, and he was, a really good figure and support in my life. And my grandmother had Alzheimer's, so she came and lived with us. My kids were very small at the time, a lot of stress at work, unionizing, and all these things were happening. And that really, it really depleted me, and I had a complete breakdown where I couldn't work anymore. And I really had to get serious about healing myself. And I got to that point of suffering. And sometimes you just have to get to that point of suffering before you're willing to commit to doing something new. Mm-hmm. I think as long as you can manage it and hang in there and survive, you're just not motivated enough to face the pain. So once I got motivated, I did a lot of things. I went to therapy. So I did cognitive behavioral therapy. I did hypnosis. I traveled to Peru and did ayahuasca. I went to healing centers. I did retreats. Like I just really went all in, because I just couldn't live like that anymore. And I had my young kids, and I just wanted to be a better me and live in peace within myself, because it was just really hard to always be struggling, get up, go to work, do the same thing day after day, struggling to
you have to get over it anyway.
Exactly. So I just went really in deep and processed all those experiences that I had, and changed the meaning and the interpretation that I had put on it, because a lot of it was that I'm bad, it's my fault, I'm broken, I'm unlovable, I'm dirty, I'm all these meanings that you attach to the trauma, and the world being unsafe and uncertain and unpredictable, and all this kind of insecurity that was in me. And I just had to really start shifting my way of thinking, shifting my emotional reactions. And in order to do that, I had to go back into all of the trauma that I experienced it, and reprocess and reinterpret, and just come to peace with what's happened in my life and who it's made me as a person as a whole. Because again, like I think if you're taking all these pieces of your life and you're hiding them away in that Pandora's box and keeping the lid shut, when if you think of yourself as a puzzle and you've got all these pieces that are thrown away, your puzzle is not whole and complete. And I certainly didn't feel whole and complete, and I didn't feel peace and happiness within myself. And every time I achieved all of these things or got what I thought was going to make me happy, I was still the same here. I was still dysregulated.
Yes. Oh my goodness. That's amazing. You're talking from my heart. The same experience happened to me. Because for years I thought that somebody is following me, is going to kill me, because the thief want to rob my car, and he threatened me with a knife point. And I had this experience all over, like in my mind, repeating. And then I came to my sense that I have to feel secure. And by the time you don't feel safe, that's not going to happen in you. Like healing starts from inside. You have to talk to yourself and sit and see if you want to continue going to this deep level of anxiety, depression, and killing yourself and repeating this sins in your mind, or you just want to stop it. So there are two things here. Some people saying, you should repeat those sins to confront your fears. But to me, repeating didn't help. I didn't want to avoid it. I know that happened to me, and I didn't want to repeat all the sins in my mind. For sometimes I reframed my brain. I did many new things. So I tried to replace all the trauma and all the thoughts I had. So I started my master's degree in another country. So I had too many challenges, because you start in a new country, you have to start a new language, so many things happening. So I didn't have time, to be honest, to think about the trauma.
That the trauma will eventually force you to take the time when
exactly.
you get. But yeah, you're right. As long as you can avoid it, most will. And it's the basic pleasure pain principle. We are programmed, we are wired to avoid pain. So we're going to avoid it if we can.
Yes, but when we moved to a new house in Canada, the first day, all the windows we didn't have any curtain, because that was the first day. And I was really afraid. I just repeated everything to my mom. Wow, that's going to happen. Oh, I really is afraid. And I said, no, nothing going to happen. The second day, we had curtains and everything looks secure. So I
Yeah.
felt much better. So you see, these triggers come and go. It's not like they're never uh, leave you alone, but you
Mhm.
can actually slow down. You can actually take the lesson. You can learn how to deal with it, and you
Yeah.
can actually um, the, reduce the adversity of it.
Yeah, and part of it is, you know, giving yourself different messages, but part of it is also healing at a deeper nervous system level. And, you know, one of the first things I tell people is that there are, you know, neurobiological changes that happen with PTSD. So, you know, there's part of it that really making your nervous system safe, because if, you know, you can tell yourself you're safe all you want, but you know, your nervous system, once your amygdala is triggered and you've got, you know, you've got something that's triggered your stress response, whether it's just, you know, you've got these repeated loop of memories. So to break the loop, and I talk a lot about this in my PTSD book, is the relation between the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the prefrontal cortex, and how that loops around where you can't inhibit those memories, and it keeps triggering the amygdala. So that's the you know, triggering the fear center, the stress response. So, you know, when I'm working with clients, you know, I always say, you know, the first step is, you know, making the commitment to use that energy that you've been using to block and resist and hide and build a wall away from your trauma, and to use that towards your healing, and really talking about, you know, how to heal at a nervous system level. And sometimes it requires, you know, medication in combination with therapy. But you know, I'm a huge advocate for therapy, not just because I'm a therapist, but because that was, you know, a huge part of my healing. And, you know, I have people not repeat, you know, you were talking about repeating trauma, and I don't believe in repeating the trauma over and over again. But what I do believe in, and what I do with my clients, is I do a lot of guided imagery with hypnosis, where I guide that person to, you know, take a detached perspective. So kind of, you know, rise above the content of their life or the movie of their life, all that stuff that's happened in, you know, each and every person's life, and to detach from that, and to allow their subconscious mind to go back into those areas where trauma happened, where something happened, and to reframe, reprocess, take the positive lessons. Because the way your memory works is, every time you think of your trauma, for example, you make it worse, because that's your survival system wants to make sure that it keeps you safe. This is, you know, a mother grizzly bear protecting her cubs. If you think of your PTSD in that way, and trying to, you know, calm that protective system, and, you know, make friends with that, you know, versus trying to always fight it and push it and resist it. And then you can start, you know, using some of the experiences that you've had, seeing it in a different light, changing the meaning, and then starting to, then you're you know, having your memories go from constantly looping around to now being stored in other, you know, being safe to store it in other parts of the brain, so that you're not constantly reliving those memories over and over again. So I think that's a huge part of the healing. And then it's a lot of practice, and knowing that it'll sometimes feel like an uphill battle. There'll be a lot of slides backwards in someone's healing journey,
Mm-hmm.
but to be, you know, self-compassionate and gentle with yourself, the way you would be with, you know, your most, you know, best friend, or a loved one, someone that you love very much, and to always treat yourself that way, and really separate you from those PTSD episodes, and have, you know, knowing that when you're triggered, that those feelings of guilt, of shame, that's, you know, that's part of the PTSD. It's not who you are. When I talked about that separation, that awakening that I had at 19, where I had all these, you know, problems and all these emotions and experiences that I was struggling with, and then this awareness of, you know, this is who I really am, beyond all those stories of shame and trauma and guilt and you name it. So, you know, helping people separate from that and start to heal the PTSD, start to heal the nervous system, in combination with that, start practicing just the mental voice, constantly staying in that state of, is this really helpful? Is this supporting me in healing? And all that kind of stuff that really goes a long way if you practice consistently.
Yes, it's a process. It's not one day recovery.
And,
Yes.
you know, and we want the quick fix. We want the Band-Aid drive-through solution, but
It's not going to happen. Because let's say if you lose a child, which is, I think that's the worst thing that can happen to anybody. If it happens, then whenever you see another child, you're going to repeat it in your mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's not something that you can forget.
Yeah.
But at least
it's not about forgetting, right? It's about
yes.
processing, reinterpreting, and being able to integrate that experience that's a very difficult experience, but be able to integrate it into the whole of who you are and take, you know, whatever meaning and reinterpret that so that it can actually benefit you in your life.
In all PTSD survivors, when I talk, and including me, there is the moment that you see that's enough, or something happened to you which stop all your thinking about your deeper depression and anxiety, as you had awakening call, somebody else in the forest, middle of forest, wanted to commit suicide, and then something amazing happened to him. And then for myself as well, like I had a near death experience. This is very difficult when somebody want to kill you, and then all of a sudden you say, oh, my life could be totally changed. I mean, I could be paralyzed, I could be dead. And after that happened, I just realized, oh, I'm alive. I should be grateful. And that was a bit of relief. And then that's why I could recover from PTSD much easier than others.
Mm-hmm.
So because I didn't lose many things. I just lost my car. And the interesting thing, the thief called me because he had my mobile in the car. He called my home, and then he actually returned the car. Can you believe this? So, yeah, because in my heart, I already forgave him, because I know if you have this resentment with you, I said, I don't know what happened to him. He was really restless. And when I could see him running with my car, I was there in the middle of the street, and all the people surrounded me, and I couldn't hear anything. I could see him in my mind that he's running with my car. I think those moments is something happening to you which is not in your ordinary frequency of your human being.
Mm-hmm.
That was something totally different. Yeah. And it's the interesting point was that, like, I couldn't insult him, I couldn't hate him at that moment. I just forgave him.
Mm-hmm.
And that was so bit of relief, because this is a problem people have. The ordinary things happen to us. You insult, and I'm not saying insult, like don't feel right about this. And then you try to show your resentment. I couldn't say anything. It wasn't me. I felt and said, okay, I just don't want to talk about it. I just want to be healthy. Yes, I had back pain. It took me some time to recover, but I was alive. You know, that was a bit of relief. And that's why I was happy that I could be recovered from it. Yeah. And that's why I said, I have to change my life. So I knew that time life is short.
Yes. And I've seen some people who've had, you know, a car accident where they say, I know I should be grateful to be alive. I know this, but I just keep hearing the crashing, you know, the crunching of the metal and the skidding of the tires. And I just keep replaying it. I know I should be grateful to be alive, which then adds to the guilt because they should, you know, they should feel a certain way. They should feel lucky. They should feel happy, and people will tell them, you know, you survived, you're here, yay. Yes, but it's rewired my nervous system, and I am experiencing the symptoms of trauma and PTSD. And so there's still a whole healing. And I found that, you know, in my clinical practice, that the outcome doesn't always really reflect the intensity or degree of the PTSD symptoms that a person's experiencing. So, you know, for example, someone who went through a near-death experience, they were being put under with the anesthetic, and they had a reaction, which is a reaction that's, you know, 1 in a million or something like that, a very, very small percentage. And they died and were revived and developed PTSD from that. And again, you know, lucky to be alive, don't remember anything of what exactly happened, but again, developed a severe case of PTSD and some pretty intense symptoms. And then other people who go through a really traumatic experience with a very negative outcome and somehow recover. So, you know, it has so many things to, you know, so many factors or variables at play that it's just impossible to tell what experiences will trigger what symptoms and for how long and how intensely. So I found that, you know, it's sometimes I'll have someone come in and think, oh, they're going to heal very quickly, and they don't. And then sometimes thinking, oh, you know, they've been traumatized so often and so deeply that they're not, you know, thinking that their prognosis isn't good, and then they do very well. So it's interesting that way.
At least they came to you. They realized that they need to be healed. But I knew a lot of people, they have a lot of traumas like bipolar, and they have lots of conflicts, issues. And this happened to them because like after divorce or bad betrayal, what is it?
Betrayal,
bad relationship, you know, but they deny it. And what happened? Because they didn't forgive themselves and their partner, they're never gonna be healed.
That's right.
Because I've seen so many of them, even close people. And the problem is that they can't actually deal with what happened. They look okay, you know, but in certain situation, everything gonna be changed. They change into another person, and they can actually react to things that the same as other people. So they always feel they are guilty, they are ashamed, or they feel that many other people gonna betray them as well. You see these things, because the forgiveness didn't happen. If you can forgive yourself, if you can feel safe, and if you can think, especially in relationship, these breakdown happens for breakup happens for a reason.
That's right. Yeah, and I think that you know, you're hitting on a very key point. Well, a couple of key points, but you know, I believe the root of a lot of mental illness and a lot of addiction is unprocessed trauma, and that, you know, whatever's behind you that's not dealt with, it just has a way of continuing to show up in front of you, in people, places, and things, but also in your, you know, through your own repetitive symptoms and thoughts, intrusive thoughts, and all these things that continuously show up in your life internally and even show up in front of you in your life. You tend to attract the same kind of situations, people, and then are re-traumatized. So, you know, if if any, good incentive to deal with past trauma, resolve the, you know, the meaning, the emotions, and everything associated to it. You know, it's hard work, but it's hard work that really has a huge payoff.
That's an amazing point. Like unprocessed trauma. I have to think about it. Like you're right, because unprocessed trauma, if it's not resolved, gonna show up in different stages of life. So I know some people, they said, okay, my child has some problem, but if he gets married and starts his new life, is gonna be changed. But this is not gonna happen, because healing should start from the inside. For a few years they are okay, and then they are gonna be hit by trauma again, and these feeling of guilt and shame reveals again. And that,
when you get to a point where there's, you know, everything inside of you is resolved and there is nothing to hide from within yourself, there's a huge sense of peace. You know, it's not this kind of gut busting happiness or euphoria. It's just a sense of stability and balance and peace, and just everything then flows from that space. And so even though stressful things might happen in life, when you're already in that state of balance and peace, you can handle those things much better than if you're in that constant stress survival mode and waiting for bad things to happen. You're already so stressed out that once something bad happens, you just, it's too much for your system to handle because it's already at its max capacity constantly.
What are the 3 steps to self-recovery? Let's say, how do you start consulting your patients for self-discovery?
So when you say, how do I start consulting my patients, like my clients, what do you mean by that? Like, how do I start in the beginning?
Yes. First of all, how do you start recovering and helping them to recover from PTSD? What are the steps? How, and I know therapy is good because you can help them, but at the end of the day, they have to help themselves as well, right?
That's right. And for, by the time someone comes in to see me, they're looking for help. So, they've already taken that first step where, they want some healing. So I always dread when I have clients that, their mom sent them or the court sent them or someone else sent them, because
so much work, eh?
Yeah, I don't have a magic wand. I don't. I have the ability to give information, insights, resources, strategies, and to really guide someone through a process of, meeting their trauma, reprocessing that trauma. So going into those parts of their life, not repeatedly, going into that once and reprocessing and guiding them through that process, and giving them strategies, helping them learn how to manage their mind, how to manage their emotions, how to understand that PTSD has neurobiological impacts, that they're not crazy, that it's not because they're not trying hard enough, but also to understand that there's a payoff to some of the behaviors, the coping mechanisms that people develop. It helps them avoid pain, it helps them gain pleasure in a moment, but it also stops the healing process, or it also causes further damage to this, healing nervous system. So, a lot of it is around educating the person, giving them the tools, the strategies, and again, it's commitment for that person to really, go home and use the tools, because it's not an hour in a therapy session that's really going to create a change in that person's day-to-day life. It might give them the insight, and it might give them the starting point for healing. And in my PTSD guide, I really go through all of this step-by-step around how to heal yourself. And of course, I recommend that you get a counselor or a therapist, someone to help you out, but not everyone has access to that. There's millions of people that want help and either can't afford it, the waiting lists are long, or there's, maybe they've had really bad experiences with a therapist in the past and they don't want to go back. So there's a lot of reasons why people may not access professional help. And so if they want to get started, they can listen to resources like what you're offering and read a book like the PTSD guide, which is broken down in very small chunks of information, because people who are struggling with PTSD often have, lost ability to, remember, to concentrate. There's attention deficits. Like, there are real cognitive impairments that happen with PTSD. And so it's very hard then to have enough internal resources to then do all this work by yourself. So if you can get anyone, even if it's, a friend that you trust and can really help you process some of this, it's just that most people don't, they don't have, depending too on the type of trauma, they don't have the skills or the resources or even the ability to listen to somebody's story that's very traumatizing. It almost traumatizes them. So it's kind of like that double-edged.
That's the way you can differentiate coaching and therapy, because coaching is not a therapy.
Right. Yeah. And I do a lot of coaching.
Yep.
As a life coach, I do coaching, and as a therapist, I do therapy. And in therapy, some of the types of therapy is, supportive counseling, some of the talk therapies, psychotherapy, some of the CBT is a lot around the here and now, and it's a recognized, evidence-based practice. And then there's even deeper types of therapy that are really going in and digging down deep into the root cause of, the problems that you're having in the here and now don't come from the here and now often. They come from way back there, things that happened a long time ago that now have, changed your way of perceiving and interpreting and reacting mentally and emotionally to the people, places, and things in your life.
And I think that it also depends on your intensity of the trauma you're suffering. If you are aware enough, yes, you can go to a coach and you can heal yourself. But sometimes, as you said, it's a long, deep, rooted in you and it's not really easy to deal with it. That's why you need a therapist. That's what I understand. But again, even somebody who come to the therapist, therapist should aware of what he's doing, because if he's not willing to do this, then it's not going to work even for him.
That's true too.
Yes.
And it brings me back to kind of the beginning of my story where, when I started my career in therapy as a therapist, I was 25 years old. And, I'm not the therapist I was 22 years ago, because I've gone through a lot. So, I had training, I had tools, I had formal education, I had all the stuff that made me a therapist, but it was in going through my own healing process that made me
exactly
an therapist. And so I wish I could go back and see some of the clients I saw early in my career and have a redo. But if you
by this time they are recovered.
Start find another one. And actually, even in my early career, I did help people, but in a really different way than.
Yeah, because it's not deep enough. I know.
Right. Yeah.
Like,
I know how to
I'm a software engineer. So my background is IT. And the interesting point is you actually study for 4 years, have a bachelor degree, and you say, oh, I'm okay, I can go to the market. And then you start work, you have nothing to do with the work because you don't have any experience how to do it. Whatever you just had was exams, books, and they are not enough. This is not the real experience of the workplace.
Yeah.
So
And then
I
you have
think
your ego and you don't know what you don't know. You know, you
exactly,
think
it
you
just
know
gives you some
it all.
knowledge, give
Yeah,
you some knowledge, but you how do you want to use this knowledge? There are lots of knowledge you can find through internet, Google. That's why a lot of people only get the certification, and it's not enough because you cannot use the certification if you don't have experience.
that's right.
But as a PTSD coach, what I realized, I got the certification because I wanted to know exactly what is the conventional PTSD is. And I tried to compare whatever I read with my own experience. And then I see you shouldn't limit yourself to whatever book says. Because it's not enough. People are different. Their treatment are different. Your discovery of your word is totally different. And I actually deal with my PTSD in another aspect. So I did something else. So
Mm.
that's why you shouldn't limit it to these tools and books and studies. If
Yeah.
it's that uh, all the patients should be uh, analyzed the same thing and they should be treated the same way. But as you see, before I was thinking, okay, these medical doctors, all of them had the same degree
Mm.
and they did the same study, same books. But how come one doctor diagnosis is different from another one? You see, that's the difference between experience and like the level of smartness.
Yeah.
The IQ is different, whatever they see, but some of them are so formal. They just go by the blood test and then do this. But sometimes I see a lot of like smart medical doctors, they actually try to find the root cause of the issue. So they don't just see the surface. That's the same for the therapist. So I see you, the therapist can actually go deeper to your past life. So go to the root cause of the issue, why this happened to you.
Mm.
So you actually resolve that
And
root
you can
cause.
never get the why. You know, you might
Yes,
never get the real why, but you know, you can definitely put a new meaning and interpretation and process it and take whatever you know, whatever positives, whatever good, or you know, reframe it in a way, because again, when you're opening that kind of memory drawer and you're revisiting any memory, we're always shifting and changing those memories. So we want to shift them and change them in a way that works better for our nervous system so that we're not continuously in fight or flight mode. But
mm,
again, going back to what you were saying about just, you know, the doctors and really trying to get to the root cause. And I think with any client therapeutic kind of relationship, for those who are able to access therapy, is to really have that therapeutic rapport and that trust and that safety, and being able to really talk about what's going on and have that feeling of being able to really open up. Because if you're going into therapy and still hiding and still keeping things to yourself, you're really not going to get the benefits, and you're not going to heal in the way that you could if you really were able to open up. And so if you don't feel that connection with the therapist, get somebody different.
connection.
There's
Exactly. You
individual.
know, I had the same experience with my fertility doctor. I couldn't connect to her. It's
Yeah,
like I was really disconnected and I didn't get good waves from her.
right.
Maybe she was good for many people, but not me. Or
Exactly.
when I went to acupuncture for my own fertility issues, that was the same.
Yeah.
I switched from one acupuncture to another. The third one I could connect.
Yeah.
So you see, that's the same thing. There are lots of therapists there. Not all, I'm not saying they are good or bad, but I know somebody had therapy for 23 years. 23 years. If this therapist gonna work for you, you could be recovered much earlier. You will still feel depressed and this is not working. You should switch your therapist, that
Yeah,
sort of
and I
thing.
think
So,
that,
so
it's a
that's why
good
they
point.
don't believe it, because they didn't good experience with one therapist, and they think that all of them are the same. They are not.
Yeah, and some therapists have this set of tools, and another might have this set of tools, and so if whatever you're doing is not working, or maybe it did work to a certain point, but then you've become stagnant, then it is time for a break. It's time for a change. And I think if we just keep doing the same things, talking to the same people, having the same conversations, repeating the same thoughts in our head, nothing can ever be different on the outside if everything stays the same.
All right, Liz, do you have any program or any bonus for my audience?
So I have my PTSD book that's just been released. And like I was
Wow.
saying, this book is really a guide. So this is a book that someone can take and they can learn what is trauma, how does it affect the nervous system, what to do, how exercises, like there's practical exercises, reflective questions, there's tools and strategies. And I really recommend that people don't try to read the book cover to cover, that they one little section at a time, and it's broken up into kind of, I call it bite-sized chunks. So there's, the information, there's stories about other people who have had PTSD, recovered from PTSD, or not recovered, people's journey with PTSD and how to really work through that healing program. Hopefully not on your own, but if you don't have resources, it's still a very good starting point.
Okay, I have two other questions. First of all, do you have any recommendation for people who are dealing with PTSD, how they can start and what they have to do?
So, like I said, if you're able at all to get someone to help you through this healing journey, I haven't met many people who are able to do it on their own. It's just such a hard thing to do. And I know I had a lot of helpers on my way, counselors and different people who've helped me on my healing journey. And so if you can get that support, get support. And I always tell people, understand that there's been changes to your nervous system. There's been changes to the structure and function of different parts of your brain. And, there's a lot of evidence about the neuroplasticity of the human brain. But if we just keep firing and wiring in the same pattern over and over with all of the memories and the inability to kind of block these different intrusive thoughts, and having the fight or flight response being triggered by all kinds of things in the environment, we really need to heal at a deeper level. And so, I recommend people meet their trauma. I call it meeting your trauma. And, what happened to you? What is it that you're avoiding? What is it that's hurting you? What is it that when you think about or talk about just goes and gets you at your core?
Is PTSD recoverable?
And I would say it depends. I have seen some situations where, there's been progress, but the nervous system has been so traumatized so many times for so long without any treatment. And then it becomes very, very difficult to rewire the nervous system when it's been so deeply damaged. So, I'd love to say, yes, of course. Oftentimes, yes. Oftentimes, PTSD is, there's still some remnants, and, they still have some symptoms, but it's a lot more manageable. They can live meaningful, productive lives and be able to, function well in their lives and feel good most of the time. So I found that for a lot of people, they do make significant progress. Some do not, and some recover so much that they don't qualify for the diagnosis anymore.
Thank you so much for being here. I really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you
so much for having me. I really appreciate it.